Local productions seen on Delta College Public Media are made possible with support from viewers like you. Thank you.
Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Mike Redford, and this is the follow-up. Coming up on tonight's show, gun violence is on the increase. Quite frankly, it's a public health crisis and the leading cause of death of children in America. So what's to be done about it? The state enacted some new laws recently aimed at reducing gun violence. Some say they go too far. Others say they don't go far enough. Tonight, we have two experts who work on the front lines of this very important issue. But first, we would like to hear from you to help drive the conversation here on the show. You can do that in a variety of ways via social media on Facebook. You can email us. You can dial into our follow-up hotline to voice your opinion or suggest future show topics. And you can comment on YouTube as well. And if you'd like to watch any of our past shows this season, just log on to deltapublicmedia.org. For tonight's show, our two guests, Jonathan Gold, dialed in remote there from Novi. He's an advisor with the Giffords Gun Owners for Safety. He's also been a pistol instructor for 25 years. Nice to see you, Jonathan.
Thanks for having me.
And then we have Glenn Duncan, owner of Duncan's Outdoor Shop in Bay City. Good to see you both.
Thank you. Thank you.
Before we talk about these newly enacted gun laws and get your reaction to it, I want to show a couple of graphics to our viewers and to you guys, because we've called this a public health crisis. Gun violence and the amount of children and people of all ages that have been affected by it. Children from 2019 to 2021, children and teens killed by gunfire in the U.S. has increased by 50%, and more than 2,500 killed by gunfire under the age of 18 in 2021. And then in terms of folks of all ages, since 2016, about 38,000 Americans have died annually every year, and those numbers have gone a lot higher in 2021, 22. So now for these newly enacted gun laws, we're talking about concerning storage, possession, purchasing firearms. I guess we'll start with storage, and kind of a segue into that. There have been two highly publicized cases recently about safe gun storage, or the lack thereof. We have the Crumley case, James Crumley, convicted here in the last couple weeks. His son was responsible for the Oxford school shooting. The jury said pretty much one of the biggest factors because he didn't store his gun safely. And then we have a Flint father who's been charged, the first one charged under these laws, because his 3-year-old daughter got a hold of his gun, and shot herself. She's recovering. So what do you make of the whole gun safety, storage, and how that needs to be done correctly? Jonathan, I'll start with you.
I think that safe storage is a key way to prevent incidental death. It's also a way that makes it harder. What I like to say is this: people can make the worst decisions of their lives very quickly. And every layer of security we put between someone who's desperate and them making a bad decision is a good idea. By the same token, we have a large problem with crime being committed with stolen guns. And so safe storage serves more than one application. It is a layer of safety that keeps children and unintended users from getting to a firearm. It also makes it harder to steal those guns and get them out into the community. Mm-hmm. So I see it as a pretty good double-edged sword.
It's hard to believe that we have to have a law to tell gun owners to be responsible and make sure your guns are locked up in a safe.
We have got a society right now that kind of scares me, is that before you were educated to keep away from guns, and people never broke into people's houses. You used to probably, when you were a kid, you got to walk home from school and you walked in your house, you didn't have to lock it, you didn't have to carry a key. Everybody honored everybody else's space. Well, we don't have that anymore. And so we need to be able to protect our property, and that's one way is locking it up. And there's a lot of people out, the door lock anymore is not strong enough anymore, even though it's against law to break into people's property. They're getting in there, and they're trying to steal everything. And so stealing our guns, stealing other things, we need to look at everything we have and protect it properly.
So Glenn, in your store at Duncan's Outdoor, anyone who comes to purchase a gun, they have an option of you providing them a safe, gun
Yeah.
locks. Do you ask them about it?
Yeah, well, number one, every gun sale, because the state and federal law requires that a person have a gun lock, leave the store with a gun lock of some form and stuff. So they've already have a gun lock given to them. If you don't have gun locks, your local police department, through National Shooting Sports Foundation, has given away millions of gun locks for people to put on their guns. And so we've been trying to do this, and now we have to make sure that we educate people more. You got to do it. You got to put it on. You got to worry about everything in your house, from medicines to guns.
Yeah, I think there's some legislation in this package. I think it takes effect May 13th that gun owners can get a tax exemption. And here it is on the screen a little bit. Tax exemption if they get a safe or a lock.
Yeah, this is a project I started 4 years ago working with a legislative, and our governor said no way that she'd ever let it happen, and then all of a sudden this happened. And I thought, most other states do it for a month at the most, and ours is started February the 13th, and then they found out the law was written wrong, and so now it's supposed to go into effect on May the 13th. We hope we do, and it goes to the end of the year. That program was supposed to be any safe product. Like if you got a smoke detector, that was part of that deal.
Right.
And they changed it just to have the word gun in it.
So Jonathan, do you think the requiring sort of these safer storage laws and the Crumley case, for instance, do you think more gun owners are thinking a little bit more, thinking twice that, hey, I better do my due diligence here?
Well, I would hope so. I would hope everyone is thinking more about it. And the other thing that we need to think about is that there has been an incredible rise in gun ownership as well. There are a lot more guns out there and a lot more gun owners out there now. And one of the biggest problems I think we have is that, and Glenn can back me up or not, is that one of the most dangerous things we have is what I call the bedstand sock drawer owner. They buy a firearm, they take it to the range, they shoot it once, they load it, and they think they can defend themselves. So there's not just a lack of safe storage, there's also a lack of training going on. And that's another big problem we have, is that, if they aren't trained the right way the first time, training tends not to happen. And so stores like Glenn's, where people get training and they see the locks and they see the safes, it's really important that happens.
Education is number one of everything we are involved in and stuff. And if you're going to have a pool in your yard, you want your kids to learn how to swim. If you're going to have a gun in your home, you want the kids to learn how to shoot, how to handle them, don't touch. And the old program, don't touch, leave the area, and tell an adult, is still there. And we need kids to understand that there's steps to, when you see a gun, not to be jumping at it. This is not a toy. And we have to learn that toys are toys and guns are not part of the toys.
Right. Go ahead, Glenn. Were you going to say something, Jonathan?
I was just going to say, that's right. Guns are killing tools. I mean, we use them for sports and we use them for competition. We use them for a lot of other things. But let's be honest, they are deadly tools, and we have to treat them that way.
You betcha. Another item in this legislation, universal background checks. Previously, state law only required background checks for pistol sales. That kind of surprised me. So where are we with that? You don't do background checks on everybody that comes in to buy a gun?
Everyone that comes into a federal firearms dealer has to have a federal background done. So that's been done for many, many years. I'm back in '68, I think the number, when they really forced it all. What they did on the new law, the new law is really not a background check in the extent that all they're doing is asking the buyer to go and get a purchase permit. And getting a background check for that purchase permit is what they're hoping that would cut down crime and stuff by doing it that way. What the bad part of the open other avenues that they didn't plan on.
So Jonathan, do you think that will have much impact at all? You said there's more gun owners, there's more guns out there. I mean,
well, I certainly don't want anyone who didn't pass the background check to get one. That's where I'd have to come at it. I certainly don't want anyone who didn't pass the background check to get their hands on a firearm. I think universal background checks are a good thing. And the history, going back on that briefly, is that it was used to be for handguns only because handguns were concealable and they were being used in crimes, bank robberies, that kind of thing. And so handgun permits and mandatory checks. People thought of rifles as hunting, right? And you had hunter safety courses, families hunted together. No one was terribly concerned about crimes committed with rifles until recently because of the advent of the semi-automatic rifles being used in mass shootings.
Okay. So, Glenn, I'm just going to follow up. How does that kind of law, or these laws in general, impact your staff, the work they do, making sure that these things are implemented the way they're supposed to be implemented, I guess?
Well, the beginning of the law, it was getting complicated. They've actually tuned the law since they first did their writings of it. We've been to ATF meetings and state police meetings and stuff, and they've made it now that it's, for as a dealer, there's really nothing really changed. We're doing backgrounds on everybody, and we've done that on everybody. It's just that purchase permit, that process that the state keeps track of. And the bad part about this new law, the state police is not keeping track of who got the gun or anything else. All they're doing is keeping track of somebody might be buying a gun. And that's where they really failed in that law.
Okay. Let's talk about red flag laws. We hear a lot about that. A lot of people aren't educated about that, so I guess we have to define what that is. So Michigan is the 21st state in the nation to allow judges to issue what's called an extreme risk protection order, ERPOs, I guess they call those, to take guns away from those individuals who pose a threat to themselves and others. Again, surprised that that's sort of a long overdue law. I mean, who wants to weigh in on that? I mean,
well, I think the law has been there that anytime someone is having mental problems and stuff, judges have been able to take guns away. Family members have notified law enforcement that our family's breaking down or there's a problem stuff. So we've had things like that. The problem is with the only thing they added good to the new red flag law, there's a time lapse. And before we never had a time lapse. And so if you had your guns taken away, to get them back was almost impossible. Now, after 8 years, there's a chance to get back.
Well, actually, with the ERPO law, it's only one. It's the domestic violence bill that's 8 years.
Okay,
so
thank you. You're right.
Sure. There's an appeal process, actually. If guns are taken in ERPO, someone can go back as quickly as 3 weeks later to file an appeal. The guns can only be taken away for 1 solid year, and after that, that lapses. Now, if someone shows completely unsound judgment during that year, like committing a felony or assault and battery or finding another gun and using that, then they're probably not going to get their guns back. But if you follow the steps, it's only a 1 year removal at the maximum. And that's what I wanted about ERPO. The other thing, talking about ERPO, is this. No one knows when they're going to have a snapping point. None of us. And the people who are closest around us tend to be able to see what's going on in our lives. And there's still due process for this. So you still have to get the police involved. You have to go before a judge. A judge has to issue an order. Remember, that judge has to get reelected too.
there's that.
Yeah.
So there is a due process before this is enacted and an appeal process after it's enacted. And here's the one thing I would say. I hope I never reach that point. And if somebody came to take all my guns out of my house, I'd be pissed off. But I'd be alive to be pissed off. And I guess that's where I'd stand with it.
The problem is going to be right now is police departments don't have the storage space for it. And
Yep.
We're hearing that a lot. They're trying to make it that gun shops could store them. We can't afford to steal your guns. Go and store your guns for years or even longer if the case keeps dragging out and without charging. And we're not allowed to charge by that law right now. So they want everybody to do everything for nothing, and this is not going to happen. And that's going to be a problem with that law.
Well, I think the state's going to fund that. I think eventually there are going to be resources taken out of different acts and government aid to create storage facilities for those guns. That's an opinion.
Yeah.
I don't have that as a fact yet. But I would think that if they were going to enforce this law, there has to be a place for those guns to go.
Well, right now, talking to our local sheriff, there's nothing in any conversation at all in law enforcement, and that's sad. And that's the problem with a lot of our laws. they sound good up on surface, and then they don't do the extra steps that make the law really work and work properly. And so that's one of the ones I'm worried about.
Well, Glenn's right. Implementation is key.
Right.
And we're just now entering that implementation process. Remember, these laws just got passed.
Right.
And so even after you pass a law, it takes a long time to build the infrastructure around that law. And Glenn's right. That's what has to happen.
You did mention, Jonathan, briefly that about the domestic violence gun law that was part of this package. Previously, only those convicted of domestic violence-related felonies faced a 3-year ban on having a gun. Now it's an 8-year ban for misdemeanor offenses. So what do you make of that?
More women die every year because there are domestic batterers with firearms. I'm not aware of the exact percentage, but I believe it is 5 times the death rate when a domestic abuser owns a firearm. So I would think that removing a firearm from someone who has the temperament to commit domestic abuse is kind of the same as the ERPO law, right? We're talking about somebody who's gone to an extreme circumstance, has violated the law, and has threatened the health or livelihood of someone in their home. But in cases of domestic violence, women are 5 times more likely to die if there's a gun in the house.
Right.
Number one, I understand that and I accept that very much. So, but we need to work on being able to find people, ladies and people, a place to separate and reevaluate. And not always is taking threats to a guy that's loves his guns and loves everything, and that would be the last thing he's going to use. And so sometimes I think we're jumping to the gun, bad term, jumping at it, and we need to really look into. And right now we're getting more and more cases that if you're upset with your family or your husband, you make a comment. And I know of many cases that where wives have made a comment, husbands lost their guns, and then they get back together again, and they can't get their guns back, or their guns are gone. And so, yes, I don't want to lose any lives, but we need to go and really look at how this is happening and what other forms needs to be taken care of. And if that's the only thing we got to take guns away, yes, but we need to look into other things.
Okay, it's an election season, as you well know. Another item in this package being tossed around is excuse the pun, but restricting firearms at election sites. In essence, no open carry at voting locations, voting precincts. There is an exception for those who have a concealed pistol license. So what do you make of that?
Well, right now, I'm going to jump in real quick on this one because so when the CPL started coming out and we started getting this, it was going to be the OK Corral shootout, that everybody's going to have guns and they're just going to have lots of shootouts. It never happened. The CPL holders have been really good about going by the laws and very safe and stuff. There are very few crimes with CPL holders, and so you're taking a right away that do I need to?
No, actually, there's an exemption for CPL holders. So if you have your CPL, no one's telling you can't carry. You can't open carry at an election site.
Right.
Yeah.
And the reason for that, quite frankly, is that it's intimidating to a lot of people. The right to vote is kind of sacrosanct. And while you and I are comfortable around guns, there's a whole horde of people who aren't. And since everybody should get a right to vote without being scared, I certainly have no problem with the law written the way it is. I'm a CPL holder. I can do what I want. And I agree with Glenn. CPL is the way to go. Keeping a weapon concealed, I have absolutely no reason. The police need an open carry because they've got to get the access extremely quickly. The military has a right to open carry for obvious reasons. But as a civilian, quite frankly, I don't feel I need to open carry anything. And quite frankly, I'd prefer not to be the first target. So I'd prefer to keep my weapon concealed. I think open carry is tactically unsound as a civilian.
When we think about a lot of these mass shootings, a lot of things people bring up, particularly at schools. I mean, the Oxford school shooting is one, but there's been many others across the country. And there are those that think that we should have armed security guards at every single school, and that would be enough to keep some of these intruders and bad guys out. Would you guys support that?
It's number one, if it actually, for an armed person to be at a school, and the schools are so big, we're making, before we had a lot of little schools, and it was easy to protect a little school. When one armed guard is at a school, he's nothing. Really, that's the sad part to say. He's in the case of Oxford, there was an officer there, and so it's really got to be education to our public. We got to get our public believing in, and then other securities that you got lock the building down is a very good example and stuff. Making sure who's coming through the door, making sure every door. My dad was in charge of security and working with companies when he was on the police department. And that was a big factor that most places are not secure, and even banks back then weren't secured enough. And so we need to look at the security of our building and how we can properly make it good for our kids to come in and feel like they're not being in a military or establishment, make it about school and comfortable and that. But trying to get a person to be in the right place is impossible.
Sure, yeah.
Not just that, tactically, a school is a nightmare scenario. You've got kids running back and forth, probably alarms going off, people bumping into each other. If you told me you had a squad of Green Berets to cover every school, maybe we could talk about that.
Right.
But amateur, retired police officers and single guards, as Glenn was talking about, against an armed shooter who's already prepared their attack. Again, I know some people who, during the Aurora shooting in Colorado, said that if they had been there, they could have made that shot and stopped that shooter. Well, I got news. There was tear gas dropped. The guy was wearing body armor, and he was firing rounds into a crowd. People were jostling each other, bumping into each other, hitting each other. Friend of mine, a former friend of mine, used to be a range instructor at Fort Hood, and he told me he couldn't make that shot. So I think we have a diluted sense of what we can do in an active shooter situation.
I know that the schools acted, and my son was a teacher in Detroit, and he has a CPL. And I really believe that there's a lot of good instructors that are CPL holders that would keep up knowledge, training, and everything else that to go and have that security in the schools. And the other side says, no, they're not. Well, I got to be able to have a CPL, and I'm able to go and protect my family. And a lot of these teachers classify their kids as their family. And so I really like the legislature to look back into that idea of letting people that want to be and want to take the classes and really study and learn to go and be able to protect our kids, because they're firsthand.
Right. I have to share this. So a parent of one of the Oxford school shooting victims, after I think both Crumleys had been convicted here in the last month or so, said this, quote, "It's more than a gun. Our kids are not doing well these days. We're in a mental health crisis. The gun is just a tool. We've got to look at other things other than a gun," end quote. So I'd like to have you guys react to that, because we're talking about this gun debate, and every time there's a mass shooting, we talk about restricting guns, and yet we don't spend enough time talking about mental illness and the amount of time we need and money we need to spend in that area.
Well,
so
we're really looking backwards in our school system. Before, when you were a kid and I was a kid, there was a lot of schools. So in football, every school had a football team. And in Bay City, there was, I think with the high schools and the Catholic schools, there's 5 high schools. That was 5 football teams, 5 baseball teams, 5 football, everything. And now it's all into one. And we got all these kids crammed into one spot. And what are we doing with those kids? They don't only have so many kids can be in glee club, so many kids can be in band, so many kids can be doing another sport. We got to break up our schools, get back to the old day where the teachers knew every kid, the kid knew the teachers. We've lost that personal feeling, I think, in our whole system, and with the idea of going to a mega schools.
So Jonathan, just to follow up, do you think gun owners are sort of being unfairly targeted a little bit? That we hold the answer to limit and restrict gun ownership when it's more to it than that. So.
Well, okay. So in every situation we can quote in the world, there's more to it than that. However, in this situation, yeah, these kids need help. I don't like when we go to mental health because it puts a dispersion on some people who are actually treating their illness and taking care of themselves. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to do that. But what I will say is desperate people with access to weapons are a problem. And they're going to pick targets of opportunity and the targets they know the best. We really need to have, mental health is always a question, but I'm more scared of individual acts of desperation than I am somebody who might be ill and getting treatment, right? These mass shooters, we see at their worst. And mental health is a component. Access to firearms when you're desperate is a component. And what we need to do is be able to give these kids the support they need. And we also need mental health not to be a political issue anymore. One side seems to like cutting budgets, and one side seems to like building budgets. And one thing's for sure, mental health seems to get cut, and school counselors seem to get cut, and school resources seem to get cut. Eventually, if we want safety, we're going to have to pay for it.
Right. Well, I'll have to leave it at that. There's a lot more to talk about, but you guys are on the front lines of this stuff, and I hope that these newly enacted gun laws are a step in the right direction. It's not the end all, it's not the whole solution, but I think together, like you said, we support the Second Amendment, but we also support it to do it safely, right? So
that's right.
Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
And that's our show for tonight, but be sure to join us again next week for the follow-up as the civil and criminal cases against former President Donald Trump pile up. Two political science professors will be here to debate the legal twists and turns. That's next week on the follow-up. In the meantime, hit me up on social media or dial into our follow-up hotline. I'd really like to hear from you. Thanks for joining us tonight. Have a great night, everyone. We'll see you next week.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And make sure to click that bell icon to stay notified when we upload new content. Videos like this are only possible because of viewers like you. To help support this channel, click on the link in the description below. We'll see you next time.